Celeste, it's so lovely to meet you. So great to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time today. Now, firstly, can you tell me a little bit about your journey into the diversity, equality, and inclusivity space?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the invitation to be here. My journey started actually when I was a little girl. My father was the first Black teacher in the state where we were. And I learned a lot from him growing up. At our dinner tables, we would have conversations. My mother and my father would have conversations about his day. And we would be sitting around the dinner table and learning about his challenges, his opportunities, the things that he had gone through as being the only. And I learned a lot through that, and just growing up in that environment and watching him with the struggles, with the challenges, and then also what he had to do to overcome. So it was kind of ingrained in me as a little girl. And then growing up throughout my career, I just basically everything that I did in the time that I was working, I did through a lens of diversity and inclusion. All of my roles that I had, I tried to make sure that whatever I did, the counseling I was giving to leaders, that I did so through a lens of DE&I. But I was very hesitant about taking on a role like this, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer of an organization. And the reason why was because it was something I'm very, very passionate about. It's part of who I am. And I was happy with, how my career was going, and wanted to just continue to make an impact in the areas that I had responsibility for. And evidently that wasn't good enough for our senior leaders within the organization. And so they asked me to take on this role. I was a bit hesitant at first. And I was talking to my then boss at the time, the chief HR officer of the organization. And she said, I know how you feel about wanting to go into this type of a role, but Ken Frazier, who was the CEO of Merck at that time, Ken and I really want you to think about going into this role, and he really wants to talk to you. And so I thought, oh, here's my out. I won't be able to talk to him. He's so busy. It'll probably be a couple months before I see him. And she said, will you talk to him? And I said, yes, absolutely. And she grabbed my hand, walked me over to his office, and we talked right at that point. And the rest, as they say, is history. It's been a great journey, 8 years into this role, and I've really enjoyed it. I've learned from it. I've had my good days and my bad days, but we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm really, really excited about the opportunity, and the opportunity to not just do things within our four walls, but the opportunity to look outside and have an impact across the culture, across the world.
Celeste, that's really important what you said there about talking about impact and talking about culture. So, how can we make sure that diversity and inclusion and equality is not just for Friday afternoons, it's for Monday mornings, and to make sure that people don't have the experience like your father did of being the only in 2022?
That's a very, very important question. And we have to make sure that diversity and equity and inclusion is embedded in the lifeline of the employee, but also the lifeline of the organization. So let me give you an example. When we think about the alpha to omega of employment, so from the time that the person is a candidate who you're recruiting, all the way to the point where they're transitioning out of the organization. So through the onboarding process, the orientation to the organization, through the development, through the assessment of performance, through the advancement, and also through to the transition, whatever that transition may be for whatever reason. You have to make sure that you're looking at all of those different interjections, all of those different points through a lens of diversity and inclusion. And that involves, as an example, making sure that you have diverse candidate slates, making sure that you are bringing in diverse employees of all different backgrounds, making sure that you're keeping an eye on your talent management processes, making sure that you are keeping an eye and monitoring the promotions and special assignments and learning and development opportunities. So that's making sure that it's embedded into the employment practices. And then also, you have to make sure that it is embedded into the various different organizations and how you think about your business. As an example, marketing strategies. We should make sure that you are meeting the needs of your customers, all of your customers. Your customers are very, very diverse. And so, in order to make sure that you're bridging the gap between you, your company, your organization, and those customers, you need to make sure that your employee base reflects the diversity of your customer base, and that you're not just interpreting what you think different communities of your customers might be thinking about your product, or what might be some of the obstacles or barriers to your being able to reach those customers. You should have people of that background on your marketing teams, so you can make sure that you're bringing not just their skills, their functional skills and capabilities, but their cultural experiences into the business process. So that's just an example of making sure that you have it in the employee processes, but also you need to make sure that you're embedding it into the business as well.
That's why it's so important, actually, that DE&I is the cornerstone of every business because, like you iterated there, it's about your marketing, it's about your talent management, it's about acquisitions, it's about everything from A to Z, really. Equality and diversity has to be a part of it. But we use the words, there's lots of buzzwords, isn't there? There's diversity, there's equality, there's equity, there's inclusivity. Let's talk about equity and equality. Tell us, what's the difference?
I like to use the illustration of I think we've all seen it, the three individuals that were standing on one rock in the first illustration, and they're looking over the fence, and the third person, the person that's all the way to the right, they can't see over the fence even with one rock, and the person in the middle can't barely see over the fence, and then the person on the left, they can see over the fence very clearly. Well, if you look at that second illustration, the person on the right has three rocks that they're standing on and they can see over the fence. The person in the middle has two rocks. They can see over the fence now. The person on the left is still standing on the one rock because they could always see over the fence. And that's basically, those rocks are examples or proxies of equity. You have to put those rocks in place in order for everyone to be able to see over the fence. And the rocks represent, employee resource groups or women's leadership programs in your organization, or monitoring the promotion process to make sure that it's equitable and that you see the percentage of women or persons of color or other ways that people identify that they're getting opportunities to reach their career aspirations, and what are the actions and programs that you need to put in place to make sure that that's happening. Those are all actions of equity, because you want to get to the third illustration where the rocks are gone, the fence is gone, and everybody can see over the beautiful mountains in front of them. So that's the difference between equity and equality. We have a goal to get to equality, but we have to put those actions of equity in place because everyone doesn't have or didn't have the same opportunities as others. So that's basically kind of the difference between equity and equality.
Mm, well explained there. So tell me a little bit about your role, Celeste. What keeps you up at night?
Oh gosh. Yeah, so I lead our organization's Global Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence, and we focus in four areas in our strategy: our people, our culture, our business, and our world. And the thing that keeps me up at night, if I can go back to that illustration that I just talked about with the rocks and the people looking over the fence, for me, that fence represents all of the isms that exist: sexism, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, all of those different isms that exist and that are systemic in an organization, in our culture, in our world. And those rocks, as I said, representing the different acts of equity that we have to put in place. Well, what keeps me up is we're at a day and age where the acts of equity are causing disruption in organizations. So that person that was standing on one rock in the first illustration and is still standing on one rock in the second illustration, well, they're looking to their left or to their right and saying, well, how come they have three rocks and they have two rocks and I still just have one? And they don't really understand that they have had the opportunities and a life of privilege. They don't see over the fence. They don't see that the fence is there, I mean. And so they don't understand the isms that exist in the structure, in the corporation, in the world. And they have trouble understanding it, how it manifests itself to the person on the right who needs three rocks and the person in the middle. So sometimes those persons, they're asking all those questions. Well, why do we need affinity groups and employee resource groups? And why do we need women's leadership programs? And why are we having all of these programs and initiatives? And what about me? Why isn't there something for me? And isn't that exclusion? That's not inclusion. What we have to do is go and have the conversation to the individuals that are standing on the one rock, help them to understand that the fence is there and what it looks like to other individuals who may not identify the same way they do. And then once we've had those conversations, try to bring them to be active allies and take on a very critical role in helping us to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the organization. That's what keeps me up at night, that disruption that's happening across all organizations. And you see it manifested in a lot of different ways.
Now, you touched on it a little bit there when you were talking about different isms and perhaps people not feeling that they are included. But how can we maintain that diversity, equality, and inclusivity is for everyone and everyone can be included?
Well, we have to first understand that you are empowered to be able to make sure that you understand the role that you play in driving diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everybody has to play a role, from the C-suite, the board members, senior managers, managers and supervisors, and individual contributors, because most organizations are comprised of individual contributors. That's the largest population of employees in any organization. And so if everyone doesn't feel that they have a role to play, then we're not going to be able to mobilize the organization and make sustaining change. And so I try to make sure that people understand that. That's really, really critical. And if you don't, then you're not going to make the change that you want to see. You can't keep looking up to leaders to say, what do I do? You need to do this, you need to do that. And there is a role that leaders have to play, absolutely, in setting the direction and providing the vision. But there also has to be a role that everybody plays in driving diversity, equity, and inclusion through the organization.
Hmm. Now, let's talk tech for a minute. Now, what part can tech play as an enabler, I guess, of diversity, equality, and inclusivity?
Well, I look at it as the way or the medium by which we communicate as one way. For example, when the pandemic occurred and most of us were sheltered at home, our connection to other people, if they didn't live in our own household, was through technology. And so I remember getting the question posed to me, well, how are we going to continue to execute on our diversity strategy if we're now all sheltered at home? And, we're in a global society. Everyone doesn't work or live in the same building as everyone else. And so in order to reach everyone across the different markets, across the different countries, we had to use technology to get our message through. And so that was something that was always a component of our strategy, because we operate in hundreds of different markets. And so it was constantly part of how we connect to our employees and leaders. But we really had to make sure that everyone understood that that connectivity was critical to our being able to continue to grow and nurture a culture of inclusion. So managers and leaders had to make sure that they were demonstrating inclusion in this virtual reality. So that's one thing. Second thing around technology and data, leveraging data to understand where the pain points are in your respective organization so you can really apply different interventions to get at those obstacles and those barriers that are getting in the way of there being a more inclusive, belonging, engaging culture. So you can use a lot of different things. You know, you look at your candidate information and looking at those numbers. You can look at employee opinion surveys and look at the data in different ways from the standpoint of male versus female and how they answered the questions. That's an indicator on any differences that you might see in the culture. So there are a lot of different things that you can do to make sure that you're leveraging technology to enable the messaging and to drive DE&I.
Now, Celeste, I know that you have a book coming out. It's exciting time. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, the book is called How to Be a Diversity and Inclusion Ambassador. And the book is primarily a result of years and years of talking with different people externally, different conferences, and they would say, you know, I hear what you're saying, Celeste, and I really love and inspired by what you said, but I'm, you know, an individual contributor, or I'm just a first line supervisor or manager. I don't know how I can contribute to making a change in my company. And, you know, it wasn't just individual contributors or first line managers that said this. I had senior leaders saying that, you know, I can't do anything. It's the executive committee. Or I had seen executives saying, well, I don't want to get out ahead of my peers and they're not doing much. And I just feel like I don't know what I can do, or I'm having trouble. And that lack of empowerment that seemed to be pervasive across the world, really. And so I wanted to write a book that was very pragmatic, but help people to be able to understand that you all have a role to play in creating that type of environment that we want to see, and creating that environment where everyone feels valued and they understand that. And so it's just basically a very simple 3-step model of taking an inventory of yourself, assessing yourself, understanding what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And then secondly, taking a look around you and look around the company and the organization and what's going on. What are some of the things that are getting in the way of it being a more diverse and inclusive environment? And then the third thing is you can assess and you can have ideas, but you have to take action. And so the third step is just that: take action and make sure that you're doing what you need to be doing.
Hmm. Sounds like a great read. And just before we go, finally, tell me your top 3 tips of making sure or that every business and every organization can use to make sure that diversity, equality, and inclusivity is at the cornerstone of everything that they're doing.
I think the first thing is make sure that you understand and you level set with yourself. You understand what your strengths are, your areas of opportunity when it comes to developing your DE&I capabilities. Very, very crucial. You have to understand where your blind spots are. Second, make sure that you're looking around, you understand the role that you play in making sure, if you're a leader, your management teams understand how they are being held accountable around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that they understand your expectations when it comes to diversity and inclusion, that you are demonstrating, no matter where you sit in the organization, you're demonstrating and role modeling the inclusive behavior that you want to see in others. And then lastly, help others to see the fence, help others to understand the work that needs to be done, so we can all play a role in driving diversity, equity, and inclusion. I just think it's just really, really critical, because if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to see the culture that everybody wants to see in their respective organization.
Mm, absolutely. Sounds like some great tips and can't wait to read them in the book as well. And remind us where we can get the book, Celeste.
You can get the book anywhere on Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, anywhere you can buy books, and it's available on hardback. It's available through Kindle electronically and also Audible. And then also you can go to my website, crwdiversity.com, and you can get even more information.
Amazing. Celeste, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.